So Andy, what kind of work are you doing at the moment? I know you're in Robert Gordon.
Oh no, I've moved up.
Are you, I'm sorry, you were in Robert Gordon.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know what? I've probably not updated
In
my
Surfgate.
LinkedIn or anything like that at the moment. I've actually moved. I'm at University College Birmingham now. So the far
Oh,
end of
nice.
the country, I've almost moved from one side to the other to a different institute now. So yeah, I'm based there just now, doing similar to what I was doing at Robert Gordon, being a nutritional lecturer. So
What are you currently researching at the moment in Birmingham?
okay,
What?
so at the moment, I've got two things that I'm working on. Um, and prior to this, just thank you guys for inviting me on the podcast as well, because it's not often that academics get to come on and talk about their work. I know, Lawrence, you've got a PhD, so the last time where you actually got to probably talk about your PhD was probably with your PhD supervisor in your defense. So when we get
I'm
an
still, I'm still, I'm about 6 months off my Viva, so I still have a little bit to go, but I'm thereabouts.
Okay, fair enough. So, well, trust me on this one. You grasp those opportunities because it's a chance for people to talk about your research. But anyway, two things that I'm working on at the moment, Shane. So the first one I'm working on at the moment, I've got a paper which has been submitted. I can't tell you where it's been submitted at the moment, but it's on citrulline malate. So that's some work that I've done in the past. So you'll be familiar with this pre-exercise supplement. It's in all the pre-workouts as either citrulline or it's citrulline malate. And you'll see that there's lots of recommendations out there on it. So that is actually gone in. It's had the first round of reviewers' comments come back on it. We've now resubmitted it, and I'm hopeful that that one will get accepted fairly soon. That's a follow-up paper to two other papers that we did in citrulline malate. In the first instance with citrulline malate, those two papers that we did, what we found was that actually under German volume training conditions, so you're familiar with this type of training, 10 sets of 10, what we did was we found no improvement in performance whatsoever, no improvement in muscle soreness whatsoever, no change in lactic acid between the different conditions, no improvement in force recovery or anything like this from this. So that was our first two papers. The third paper that we've done, we said, right, okay, well, maybe we did it wrong. So let's just see if a loading dose makes a difference. So we loaded it like creatine, and I can't really discuss the results on that because it's currently under review for that just now. But that's been interesting. That's been interesting, and
Mm.
it's what is fascinating is the fact that if you look at current recommendations around sports supplements, citrulline always kind of makes it in there. But if you look at the
Mm.
body of evidence surrounding citrulline supplementation, there's probably 10, 12 studies. I've published two. And of them, it's probably around about a 60-40 split towards citrulline doing nothing. So, despite the fact we've got this body of evidence that's sort of suggesting doesn't really prove any sort of improvement in efficacy and performance, we're still recommending it. So that's one paper. Does that all make sense? What I'm doing at the
Oh yeah,
moment?
Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the first one. The other one that I'm working on is I have got a large data set that I'm looking at the effects of contest preparation in bodybuilding populations on habits around eating attitudes. So, is there an increased prevalence associated with getting ready for a competition and potentially eating disorders, disordered eating patterns? And then the other factor that we're relating into this as well is body dysmorphic disorder as well. Do people that get ready for these competitions, etc., get body dysmorphia? Does it increase body dysmorphia? So we've got that. We've got off-season competitors, on-season competitors. We've got males. We've got females. We've got control group, and then we've got a personality element as well. So that's a really large data set, and I'm working on that one. So that's what hopefully will come to fruition in the next year and a half. You'll see that data, and then after that, I don't know. I might do some stuff on cordyceps. I'm quite interested in mushrooms and how they might improve. Well, it's an interesting area, and how that
Yeah.
might
It is,
improve
yeah.
cognitive
Yeah.
capacity in a sporting context. So one of the things we know is that when you get dehydrated, your ability to your decision making ability becomes influenced. Yeah. So can you maybe give something to people in that respect that will improve that beyond just dehydration, help them make better decisions. And then you guys are both Irish, so you're probably rugby fans. So in team sports, etc., when it comes to that last minute decision making, or if it's boxing or whatever it is, can you improve performance in that respect as well? So those are some of the things that I'm working on at the moment, as well as just teaching students. Does that all make
Yeah,
sense?
that's no, absolutely. That's a really, really nice three arms there of research. I suppose I'll maybe go back, Andy, to some of the citrulline malate stuff. So for anyone that doesn't know, can you kind of maybe go through um why citrulline malate might be commonly found in their pre-workouts if someone, because like as you said, if someone picks up any standard jar of pre-workout, there's probably a couple of grams of citrulline malate in there. So
Yeah.
can you kind of give a little bit on the hypothesis as to why there would be some efficacy around it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So this is the idea. If we do a little trek back through history here on this one, when pre-workout supplements that I was taking when I first started exercising and training and things like this, back in around about 2004, arginine was the big supplement that you would find in pre-workouts, yeah? And they were all around get a better pump, more blood to the muscle, more oxygen to the muscle, more muscle growth. That was the idea. Improve performance in this way. If you can get more oxygen in there, then one of the things that might happen is that you can dissipate some of the lactic acid which builds up within the muscle itself. And we know that when you're starting to get lactic acid, that's often it is the result of a lack of oxygen being there, yeah? So performance gets limited as a result. Still with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Okay. So moving on from that, what supplement companies started doing was they said, okay, well, we can put arginine in there, but actually citrulline is a precursor to manufacturing arginine in the body. And actually, if you look at the studies on this, what it shows that if you give people a whole bunch of arginine, what happens is your arginine concentrations only go up a little bit, but actually, if you give people a whole bunch of citrulline, the arginine goes up even more. So it's more effective. So it's really a sort of an idea that you can increase blood flow to the muscle. That allows you to dissipate some of that lactic acid. It also allows you to clear some of the ammonia that gets built up as a consequence of the exercise that you're doing, which maybe inhibits your ability to perform the exercise. And at the same time, it's all about force recovery, performance improvement, prolonging the ability to carry out anaerobic exercise from there. And that's why we're interested in things like, okay, well, does it reduce muscle soreness? Once you've done 10 sets of exercise, can you still maintain at a high level of force output, or can you still manage to activate your muscles just as quickly? So if you do a jump test, or if you do a rate of force development test. So that's the idea around it. Do you get a reduction in muscle soreness? Does that answer your question around it?
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you explained that really, really well. So for people, if they kind of what from your research, would you kind of say it's a supplement that people would be worthwhile people buying, people taking, or are you still kind of saying that there's a further need for investigation?
Well, there's definitely a need for more investigation, and I'll say this: if you look at the research on pre-exercise supplements per se, what you're going to see is a lot of them, and actually just pre-workouts, you don't have to look at research, have got high dose of caffeine in them. So that's the thing first and foremost that you find with these things. They've often got electrolytes in them as well, and what we call these things are multi-ingredient pre-exercise formulas. And the research around multi-ingredient pre-exercise formulas has kind of shown that if you take one of these multi-ingredient pre-exercise formulas, you take the caffeine component out of it and you leave everything else there, and then you take a placebo and you do a comparison across the three, it's usually the one with the caffeine that has the biggest effect. Yeah?
Mm.
So do
Yeah.
all those other ingredients in there actually have an effect? Well, some of the people listening to this might be saying, well, some of the stuff's underdosed. Absolutely. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely they might be. I mean, we tested my protein, we tested Bodybuilding Warehouse, we tested peak supplements, etc. And the amount of citrulline that was in the labeling compared to actually what we tested in the lab was less. So we've
Mm.
got that as a quality control factor in there as well. But based on what we found so far, I mean, we can't certainly recommend it, but it might be that we've done it wrong. You know what? Maybe it's
Yeah.
the exercise modality. We've done all the stuff on like lower body exercise. So okay, do 10 sets of 10 on quadriceps exercise, make a difference. Those are great big muscle groups. Maybe though, if you go for a 60-minute endurance cycle and you've got bouts of anaerobic exercise within that, whereby you've got to sprint like you would in a race, maybe it's effective under that scenario. Or maybe it only works in females, but or maybe it works in older males, or maybe you've got to be really elite for this to sort of work. And I guess the thing that we've tried to do is science really suffers from a lack of reproducibility sometimes. So, okay, we tried it under this condition, it didn't work, right? Well, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It maybe just means it doesn't work under this condition. Let's see how if it works under this condition. We tried that, didn't work. So we tried a third condition now, and if it doesn't work under that condition, I can't reveal the results. Then we'll be able to say, well, we've tried it under this, we've tried it under this, we've tried it on this, and the payoff is, well, we've tried it every single which way. We can maybe start excluding stuff. But you know what? Larger sample size, different groups of people, different lab, they maybe have more success of it than us. So I can't 100% rule it out, but certainly I can't make a recommendation for it as of yet. And I certainly would say that caffeine definitely works. And so do just some electrolytes. So we know that. Does that all make sense?
No, that's brilliant. I think you explained that really, really clearly.
As well, but a lot of like supplements that you get on the market like these days, they almost have like too many ingredients in them. So like you could get a pre-workout that has like 20 or 30 ingredients in it, and like the like typical consumer would probably pick one up and say, look at all these ingredients on it, must be super effective. However, the more ingredients that are in it, the more chance is that you're not getting inadequate dose of even the effective ingredients that might be in it, right? You might be getting
100%.
massively underdosed in like caffeine, which is probably going to be the most effective thing in the actual pre-workout, but you're paying much like 50 to 60 quid for the actual tub itself. And you're essentially just paying for expensive water flavoring, really. You know, personally, I only really take one of those pre-workouts as a convenience thing, but I rarely ever take them, because probably the thing that's giving me the most benefit from my training session is probably the salt I'm having in the meal beforehand and the caffeine that's in the actual pre-workout, and that's about it.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100% agree. If people spent that 50, 60 quid on just buying higher quality food, then you probably get more benefit out of that. Because we're talking about, people are all trying to look for that 1 or 2% edge. But like I say, if you could just take 50, 60 pounds and just buy better quality food, and that might give you that edge. I mean, I'm often surprised by how little fruit and veg lots of bodybuilders or athletes actually eat. Yeah. I mean, even when you're looking at people who are giving recommendations on nutrition, they say, oh, you need to eat this and that. They very often aren't even giving you the sort of minimal recommendations that we're getting from a nutritional standpoint from places like the National Institute of Clinical Excellence or the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition or the FSA in the UK. People aren't even getting that much. So yeah, 100%. You're totally spot on what you're saying, Sue.
You can just take athletic greens though.
Yeah, just eat more green stuff.
Okay, the other paper you actually discussed is, I suppose it's like the off the other side of the cliff of what we were talking about today, right? Or what we want to talk about today. So today we're going to talk about peaking, and the other side of peaking could also be the prevalence of maybe body dysmorphia, eating disorders, or the other side of bodybuilding, right? Because like when you're going through the process of your bodybuilding prep, you are inevitably going to reach that peak of like your best ever look, your best ever condition, and then the other side of it, you're kind of going the other way, which can be a challenge for a lot of people. Kind of seeing their physique go from, you know, being absolutely shredded, absolutely jacked, to going a little bit softer after prep, especially the way the body fat and the kind of weight starts to hold in like the first few weeks post prep. Would they be conditions that you would have looked at when it did come to that paper, or would it have been more so just like people going through like their bodybuilding preps and kind of looking at the prevalence of like the potential disordered eating patterns and body dysmorphia symptoms?
This is a good question. That's an interesting question to address. In this particular paper that I've got, I've basically got two what we'd call cross-sectional sort of studies. So we've got people taking a single snapshot. So they're getting ready for a competition. They're on season. Now that might mean that someone's 10 weeks into the diet. It might mean they're 2 weeks out from the show. But the nature of recruiting people to these studies is kind of challenging. So we've got them at, they could be anywhere in that point. And then in terms of the off season, they could also be 2 weeks post contest, or they could be 16 weeks contest or a year off. Yeah. So it's not terribly specific, and it is a limitation that we have to acknowledge when we write that up. It's still interesting data, but what I do have, Shane, that I can talk about is I've done a case series whereby we followed 4 bodybuilders getting ready for competition over the course of a 8-month period. So they came in the lab every single month, and then post the contest 2 months after, during that recovery phase, we also got them back in when they had put on that little bit of body fat as well. And we'd given the psychological tests to them as well at the same time. And I've got points of reference which I can give you from the literature in terms of insights as well, if you'd like to hear about that. So, well, what typically happens then in this respect, and I'm going to come back, circle all the way back round to this as well. It's complicated, yeah? So you mentioned it already. People are getting in their best ever look physiologically. Best ever look, okay? Absolutely shredded to the bone. If you look at their physiological markers, very often they're at that sort of optimal health. Then you go past like the precipice when body fat levels dip below a certain point, and I think it's different for everyone, but it's probably around between 5%, 6% and less. Then you start to see a lot of the negative physiological effects, such as a major drop in resting heart rate, metabolic rate, major drop-offs in testosterone, major increases in cortisol, etc. from this, and then all the unfavorable psychological effects that you experience from this. So if I put it to yourself, Shane, how were you feeling a couple of weeks out from your World Championships that you did in the same year that I did it?
Felt like it was just on a different planet, to be honest. Like,
That's a good description.
Didn't feel great, but you know, I think I had just adjusted to that being my baseline, which was like having no energy.
Yeah, no, of course. A common thing when I work with people that they often tell me is that they didn't realize how exhausted, knackered, how much of the side effects that they were experiencing of a contest preparation until they had came out the other side and had put some of that body fat level back on themselves. Yeah. Does that reflect your experience as well?
Absolutely. I remember maybe 2 weeks before I went over to the States for like the last show, I met some of my clients in abs in the powerlifting gym, and they were getting ready for a competition themselves, for a powerlifting competition, and like I was honestly useless. Like they were there trying to talk to me, and I just had to keep sitting down. I couldn't even like help them load the bars. I was just like a shell of myself, and they're like, "Jesus Christ, you look very gaunt."
Yeah, of course. So you're experiencing these major physiological effects, but alongside these physiological effects, you experience psychological effects as well. So you've got your just the exhaustion of being that depleted, body fat levels being that low, and your body's majorly stressed at the same time from there. So common things that you see is that if you survey people, if you look at what we call mood states or depression indices or anxiety indices, they go from being down here over the course of a contest prep to starting to slowly increase over the course of the contest prep. But it doesn't happen in everyone. Okay, and so there's a personality component of this. Some people are just more chilled. Some people are just so laid back that it doesn't stress them that much and so on. And then there's a sociological factor as well. It depends on what's going on around you, what your job is, your profession, what your support networks are. I mean, some of these guys who are major influencers might be feeling the pressure to be in shape all the time, etc., compared to someone else who they've got another job off somewhere else and they're not really worrying about that side of things, and they can come off the diet and just gain the weight and not fuss. Yeah. So we see those things. Once you get past that and you then regain some of the body weight out the other side of this, you put it back on. All those sort of negative physiological effects, symptoms, in terms of the psychological effects, they all dissipate. They all sort of disappear. And the current paradigm seems that let's start forgetting about reverse dieting per se, although that's a different discussion. But you probably want to regain some of that body weight in the post-contest period fairly quickly from there, and then you dissipate some of the negative effects. Does that all make sense?
Mm.
No, absolutely, yeah. I just had one question, Andy. Is there any kind of associations between maybe demographics or any lifestyle factors that are you found associations in with those indices of kind of negative mood or negative psychological effects?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, even from the data set that I'm working at. So if you do personality indices with people, so the factors are we call it Ocean, okay, and that's the five personality indices from the Big Five personality inventory, which is the one of the largest personality scales that you can get. There's other ones which will measure 9 and 12 and so on, but five that we know of. So you've got openness to experience or closeness to experience. You've got conscientiousness or lack of conscientiousness, if you like. You've got extroversion and introversion. You've got agreeableness and disagreeableness. And then you've got what we call emotional stability and neuroticism. Yeah. So what you see is that people, if you personality test them, if you score higher on things like neuroticism on the scale, chances of you having negative experiences in terms of body dysmorphia or eating disorders are much they're higher. Yeah, so you're at a greater risk for that sort of thing, and it's borne out in lots of data sets. So if you look at populations of people who are anorexic or nervosa, you see if you personality test them, much better predictor if you've got this. Doesn't explain the full story because there's
Mm.
huge environmental factors going on there, and certainly your environment shapes your personality, but also your biology shapes your personality as well. So your personality is 35 to 75% inherited by your genetics. So you get that from your mum and dad. So when your mum and dad are scolding you and you say you're just like your dad or you're just like your mum, it's because you've inherited some of that along with the environment at the same time. So yeah, there are some associations in terms of that. Probably unsurprisingly, if you look at populations of anorexia nervosa, much more prevalent in women, young women, and it probably bears out in these sort of populations as well. When I look at my data sets, I see that a little bit more as well. So we just have to be perhaps aware of our coaching that we're looking out for these things a little bit more and saying, okay, these people might be susceptible. You can do things though. You can give people questionnaires like the SCOFF
Mm.
or the eating attitudes test, and you can see, okay, well, is this a high risk individual right from the start that I need to be worried about and keep my eye on from this one? And I got the tool set to potentially coach this sort of person from there. Does that make sense?
No, that's brilliant. I think I suppose anecdotally people might have been aware of it, that there are individuals that might be a little bit more susceptible to uh, eating disorders like the body dysmorphia. But I think it's interesting that you can have relatively stable personality characteristics, and that there's something about the diet and the conditions of the diet, the
Yeah,
dieting phase, or at least that point, that inflection point that
yeah,
brings about the disorder. Because I suppose you can have those thoughts, and you can have a kind of maybe a little bit of a food focus, and you can maybe have a little bit of, oh, geez, I'm looking a bit fat there, and you could be 7% body fat. But it's really, really interesting about that inflection point, to the point where it goes from being present to being disordered. I
yeah.
suppose it's kind of an interesting point of how do you catch someone before it becomes that? Is that maybe a future plan of yours to maybe look at some kind of intervention strategies or?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, my strategy has always been with athletes because I don't know where that inflection point's going to be. Because I think it's
Mm,
different in everyone. Because people have got higher levels of tolerance. I mean, I've done 30 odd contests. So my level of tolerance for things is much better than someone else. And the beginners always find it really, really hard. really, really hard. So their level of tolerance is much, much less. You've got that personality element, you've got what your job might be, etc. But I always sort of think that going in, you have to just sort of set the expectations with the individual, let them know, right, okay, at some point when we're doing this is going to get tough. I've done a little bit of qualitative research on this, whereby I've asked individuals how you found the whole experience, and then give them 10 questions, look at the quotes that they sort of produce, and then sort of try and amalgamate them. And then I show that to the client so you can say, okay, well, this is what other people say. But, I mean, Shane, you're nodding your head there. As much as I tell you all this stuff, and it all sounds great, you don't know until you know.
Mhm.
Until you've experienced it yourself. So, did you have that frank conversation with the coach to say, right, or did he say to you at any point, look, at some point, Shane, you're going to probably start feeling like this, and this is going to happen, and he's going to say, like, this is kind of normal for a bodybuilding population. This is what you can expect, and you're like, yeah, okay, and then you experienced it.
Yeah, I can't remember the actual kind of transition into that period of like it actually starting to sucking though, because like
Yeah,
I've done like heaps of diets like leading up to doing the actual prep. Like I never got as lean during the regular diet as I did during prep, but I've
yeah,
gotten like feathers on quads, like veins in stomach, kind of lean before, so I knew how difficult it was going to be to an extent until it actually got towards like the competitive season. I think once the season actually started, that's when I felt it like really did kind of increase in intensity because like I surpassed the level of leanness, like getting to the stage of having like alien fingers for ass cheeks, and yeah, and I actually found like personally when I was going through the peak weeks, those to be like the most challenging psychologically because I
yeah,
was I yeah you have an expectation, right? And you mentioned it in an article that you sent over to me, how to peak, right? And
yeah,
you mentioned that like it's like a rite of passage, and a lot of competitors do expect to go through a peak week, and they have an expectation of what their body is going to look like on stage, as well as how it's going to change through the peak week, and obviously that's based on like how lean you're going to be as well, right? Because like there's no point doing a peak week if you are don't have the sufficient leanness for you to kind of actualize it. But then like the degree at which you kind of change from the start of the week to the end of the week is going to be dependent on leanness as well as like the level of muscle mass you have, right? If you don't have like prerequisite amount of muscle mass built, you're not going to have like the same kind of pop that you might see like more experienced bodybuilders on stage. So
yep,
I found that week, as like I went through them, they got less stressful over time because I had like the expectation had changed, right? But also even just the implementation of doing it, regards to like picking better food choices, not doing as much kind of body checking. That was one thing. Um, and then even as well, just the kind of ability to actually kind of navigate the week because I think after you do a couple of months, couple of months of like, calorie restriction, and then you have a week coming in where your calories might go up a little bit.
mm-hmm.
Even just that, like that little bit of freedom for me at the time definitely was a little bit kind of harder. I felt like myself being absolutely ravenous during the peak weeks, but
Yep,
not as hungry when I was actually going through the diet phase. And that as like had like the how to say it, like psychologically it was tough because I was really trying to fight my internal kind of drive to want to eat more and go off plan,
yep.
and that also being a challenge. So I suppose that kind of ties into um the kind of paper that we were talking about there, as well as like kind of going into more of the kind of peak week protocols and like why would I even bother peaking if it's gonna be a little bit kind of harder for me psychologically.
Yeah, no, it's an important question to ask. I mean, one of the things that you asked, you touched upon there was that sort of that rite of passage. Like it's almost an expectation that people have got that we're going to be doing some sort of peak week, and it'll be the same. It's the same in strength sports. People are expecting some sort of taper to get them ready for the event itself, and they're expecting that taper is going to give them that extra 35%. And if there's not a taper there, that could also have a negative psychological consequence on it. So there's that sort of placebo element almost of it round there. So
I suppose my question kind of following on from that is like, like what is the point of peaking like for a competition? Like why
okay,
can't me at the start of the week just follow my usual kind of like my usual calorie protocol and just step on stage at the end of it?
okay. Well, it's a good question. It totally is. I mean, what we like to do in science, and Lawrence, you'll do this as well, is we like in science to put things in bins. Yeah, we like to put things in boxes, and we're really fond of definitions. Yeah, so it depends on what you're trying to define a peak as, because all peaking is just a strategy like tapering to help you look your absolute best. Yeah, and there's dozens of ways you could do it. I mean, you could eat the same thing all week, and then just at the weekend you just change your diet for one day for the competition itself from what you would regularly do, and that's probably a style of peaking because you've just alter something to taper yourself for the event, or you just change your training parameters a little bit so that you're better rested in terms of what you would usually do. So again, that's a peaking strategy as well. So it depends on what we're defining as peaking. But if you go by just the sort of definition that it's just a slight change in your regular strategy in order to maximize your physical look on stage, then I think when I surveyed bodybuilders, we're talking around about 98% of people will do it. So nobody ever just leaves things roughly exactly the same. There's always some nuance on it. So that's the first point. In terms of a sort of more graded sort of definition, it's really a strategy which involves the manipulation of macronutrients, so carbohydrates, proteins, fats, sometimes alcohol as well. The manipulation of or not manipulation of fluids, so water intake, restricting or not restricting, alterations in your electrolytes, so addition of sodium or not sodium, or changing potassium levels or not, and then a manipulation in terms of your training frequency, training intensities, training styles, and then rest parameters. So if you're manipulating any of those things, then it's probably some sort of peaking strategy. The big questions are around what strategies are you using to try and maximize the look that you have for the stage. And believe me, I've had guys where I've just kept stuff very similar over the course of the week, like you've described as well. So does that answer the first question? Like, why peak in the first place?
Mhm.
And then, well, what is peaking?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose one thing that you could say is like at the start of the week, if I didn't do any kind of protocol, I could be getting on stage flat, and then you also have the people who might have went through an appropriate like peaking protocol and they're full, and then you also have people who could be on the other side of that, which is like spilled. So like these are pretty common terms to hear within like the kind of bodybuilding space when it
Yep.
does come to peaking. So could you give us a little bit of a kind of insight as to like what those actually mean? Because I know the difference between flat and full could be an improvement, but then full to spilled could be you could end up like looking completely worse.
Yeah, no, 100%. Okay, so we've defined what peaking is essentially, and I've said that we want to maximize our look. In terms of maximizing the look, you can break it down into different components, like you said. So very often we want to reduce the amount of subcutaneous water, so the water that we've got underneath our skin in this layer here, to try and produce what we call a dry look. Yeah, so I'm thinking of guys like James Melville or Bada Lekan, the really dry looking competitors. You look at him and you're like, that guy's got no water on his body whatsoever. He's really, really tight. So we're trying to sort of maximize that area there. We've got trying to minimize any sort of stomach bloating that you get from here. So have that really, really tight look as well. And if you can combine that with a dryness, even better. So I know someone like a Will Usher is a good example of this as well from here. To maximize that sort of muscle volume that you described as well. So having that fullness so that the muscles pop right up against the skin so you can see the veins, and we're actually pressing the skin so that you can see the detail that we've got in our body as well. So that's another sort of look there. And I think someone like a David Kay is a really good example of a guy that does that sort of thing really well as well. And then we want to, at the same time, make sure that obviously we're trying to have the healthiest look we possibly can as well, because you'll see this in competitors too. You see people who look overtrained, tired. Flatness is a thing that you mentioned, but also fatigued, and their body's just been done in from weeks and weeks and weeks of dieting. They've overdone it, and they can be at risk of losing muscle mass, or they have lost muscle mass. And then I suppose the final thing we want to try and do is we want to try and make sure that we've provided the athlete with enough energy so that they can actually perform the task they have to do itself. So that's an often overlooked part of this as well. You want to look some way, but if you can't squeeze your muscles because you've not got enough liquid in you or enough carbohydrate there, or you maybe need to take a little bit of caffeine before you go on stage, then we should consider that as well. In terms of fullness, the definitions, flat just simply means it's like a balloon, and the balloon's not got any water or glycogen in it. And if we blow that balloon up, then it becomes full. So that's a definition there for you. I think we touched on the other ones there. We're talking about dryness, is that loss of subcutaneous water on there. And the other sort of definitions will come to me over time. But they're the main ones that people talk about in terms of fullness, dryness. Oh yes, and spilling over. This is a term that people often use when they're trying to describe a look whereby they've got themselves in great shape. They've got that dry crispness. You can see the really low levels of body fat, and then they've consumed too much carbohydrate. And what's happened is, as a result, they end up holding a whole load of water, and that water goes underneath the subcutaneous skin. And that can occur from just way too much sodium as well. So it's not just they've eaten too much carbohydrate. It might be that, I don't know, they've done something crazy, like had a pizza or something like that, and just like tried to guess what might happen, and they've just completely spilled over from there. So does that give you all your definitions and that sort of further insight into what we're trying to do?
What kind of prevailing strategies do you guys see commonly in peaking, and maybe what are the ones maybe that are common but are maybe counterintuitive to that peaking process?
Okay, so the sort of common ones that you'll see are what you describe. If you looked at like aerobic, I say aerobic, but endurance sports, this notion around classical carbohydrate loading, that's a fairly common one, with or without a depletion phase on there, because not everyone seems to do that. Yeah, the idea is thus. Yeah, if you can deplete your muscles of all the muscle glycogen that you've got within them, and the intramuscular triglycerides that you've got in them as well, from doing a diet which is very low carbohydrate and very low very low calorie in total, but has sufficient protein in it. So, for example, if I need 2,800 calories a day in my regular diet, I might go down to like 1,400 or 1,500 and just have it really high protein and just try and obliterate the carbs in my body. Yeah, and you can do that quite effectively with high frequency, with high repetition type exercise. And the research kind of shows that you're going to deplete around about between 20 to 50% of the muscle glycogen stores in a single bout. And if you do that in successive days, high rep training usually, doing this, then you can really get a sort of flat look in your body. And I've seen this quite a lot in competitors visually when you take photographs, but also if you ask people to weigh themselves, they might start the week, I don't know, at 73, 72 kilograms. By the Thursday of 3 days of carb depleting in the morning, they could easily be 71 or 70 kilos. They've dropped all the glycogen in their muscle, and they've dropped a lot of the fluid and the intramuscular triglyceride stores. So that's the first thing. You then load up on the carbohydrates. Yeah, and what you're trying to do there is something called muscle glycogen supercompensation. Yeah, so if you can regularly store 500 grams of carbohydrate across muscle and liver, yeah, you can actually store a little bit more because you've gone through this depletion phase on here. So you can get another sort of 5 to 10% carbohydrate in there from this. Your carbohydrate storing enzymes are super primed to take these things on here. And what you do is you load up on this. And that's probably the most common strategy, is the carbohydrate loading phase. So it's either people will do that deplete, or they'll not bother with deplete, do the regular plan, and then 3 days, 4 days before, they'll up the carbohydrates in the diet from there. In terms of the literature, when you look at this, and the studies, I think I sent you some links here, Shane, on this as well, they sort of see between around about a 3 to 7% increase in muscle size, yeah? So if you measure someone's bicep, do a carb loading protocol on them, the bicep gets a little bit bigger. And if you're on stage as a bodybuilder, obviously we want that. So there is a potential positive effect off of the back of it. So carbohydrate loading, definitely probably the most common strategy. Thereafter that, the next most common strategy I would say is probably on the day carbohydrate loading as well. So just people backstage, you'll have seen this a lot, Shane. Whatever it is that they want to have, whether it's gummies, sweeties, whether it's grapes, jelly babies, honey, syrup, it doesn't matter. As long as it's some sort of simple carbohydrate, people having large amounts of that combined with some sort of pumping up protocol just to volumize the muscle at the same time. So most common ones are those ones. In terms of things which are probably counterintuitive, water loading strategies, drinking a whole load of water. I mean, bodybuilders will know this. Your Strength Syndicate followers who are more interested in strength and powerlifting, maybe not so much. If you drink a whole load, it causes something we call polyuria. So even though you're taking in huge amounts of volume of water, you then end up excreting huge amounts as well. So fairly common cutting strategy if you're trying to make weight for an event as well. Big question on that one though is, because carbohydrate is stored in the muscle as glycogen and it's stored with fluid. So for every gram, you're getting around about 5, maybe even 6, 7 grams of fluid stored. And because you're not going to mobilize those glycogen stores to maintain your body's blood glucose levels, that muscle probably stays with the water in the muscle. So if we were to cut the water on the day of the contest to try and get that extra dry look, probably going to be okay in terms of what the muscle's like. I wouldn't cut it completely, but you'd probably get away with, if you were drinking, say, regularly 6 litres or 5 litres, you could probably get away with 2 litres and you'd probably be okay. I wouldn't recommend restricting it completely, like a lot of people do. Does that make sense? So I'm aware of talking there. I forget that.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. No, Jesus, no, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I suppose the main reason I asked that was if we think about maybe powerlifting peaking strategies and maybe bodybuilding peaking strategies, while obviously there's a heavy nutritional element to it. You kind of talked a little bit about the training element. So what kind of, I suppose we went a little bit on how we might glycogen deplete for those that were maybe using that strategy to peak, but what other kind of changes in training would have been reported in that kind of phase of the peak?
Okay, so good question. One of the goals is to try and have the healthiest look you can possibly have on stage and the most recovered look you can have on stage as well. So usually what happens, if people train Monday to Friday or Monday to Saturday and the contest is on the Sunday, they stop their regular training protocols they normally do, and they'll usually around about 4 days out, they're maybe resting from there. So they train, I don't know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the rest of the week's a rest. And because you're trying to carbohydrate load, obviously if you do exercise, you use up the carbohydrates in the muscle. And I think that's a common mistake people make. They exercise while they're trying to carbohydrate load. It's like, guys, you're trying to load. How do you expect to get fullness if you're using the carbohydrates up, particularly with bodybuilding type exercise, which is glycogenic, yeah? We use glucose. So that's a common mistake on there. The other one is people train their legs. I mean, if you do a really hard leg session, your legs could be sore for days, yeah? And then you can't squeeze them on the stage. Or maybe they're not sore still, but maybe you just lose a little bit of detail in the legs. So that's a fairly common mistake that people make. So just restricting the training in terms of the days out for the contest to make sure that you can recover. I mean, you're not trying to produce a maximum voluntary effort on the stage. So you've seen the research, I'm sure, close to, if you do close to a 1 repetition max or maximum training, it takes 12 days to be able to produce that force again. not so much of an issue for the bodybuilder, yeah, if they just train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the contest is on the Sunday. So in terms of training styles, it's normally trying to just get a pump. Intensity is around about between 60 to 70%. Sets might be between around about, say, 12 to 20. But it's much more in terms of increasing the or reducing, sorry, the rest period that people typically do. Although other people, they do it differently. Other people do it differently. If you're not going to train your legs though in that phase, then to get the glycogen out the legs, you've got to practice your posing. So you've got to just do as much isometric contractions as you can. So squeezing the fuck out. And if you can do it when you're depleted and it's really hard, you're posing then on stage it'll be a breeze. Because as Shane will tell you, being on stage is hard. You're up there for a long time, and I helped him with his posing. I told you.
And I suppose one thing for anyone that's ever been to a bodybuilding show is what they might see is people cramping.
Yeah.
Can you maybe explain a little bit on that phenomena? Why people you might see someone go down and it's nearly like they've torn a hamstring, or you can see someone and you can nearly see an involuntary contraction of a lat or something. What could cause that?
It's a good question. Good question. So there's probably a few things going on there. Posing fitness, it could be that. It could just be that someone is just, they've not practiced their posing enough. And they're just cramping up because they just don't have the endurance in the muscle to be able to hold it for as long as they want to hold it. So that's the first point. Maybe the next ones are, maybe there isn't enough fluid there. So that's what I was saying before. You need to be able to perform. You probably don't, I wouldn't recommend ever restricting your fluid completely on the day of the contest, but I would say you don't necessarily have to drink huge amounts on it. You could just keep it at your regular intake, and as long as you've got enough to perform, you're going to be okay. An electrolyte imbalance could be the other one that's going on there as well. People get stressed, man. That's the other thing, and the amount of nervous energy you can burn through on that stage when you're stressed. Hot lights on you as well at the same time with that going on. Lack of fitness, lack of electrolytes, all that sort of stuff. And I think it's just a little perfect combination of all those things. I mean, cramp itself, I mean, it's an involuntary contraction, isn't it? Am I right in saying, you can correct me this, Lawrence, is it that your calcium channels are kind of stuck there in terms of your cross bridging or your electrolyte? You've got a little bit of an electrolyte imbalance, and you've just kind of got those cross fibers stuck together because you've not got
Yeah,
enough.
I think when we get the calcium ion pump, or
Yeah,
that interaction between sodium
yeah,
coming out and calcium coming in, yeah, I think that
yeah.
there's too much of a build-up of calcium, yeah.
Mhm.
But it's, I suppose, from your research, have you any kind of plans then, um, maybe to establish guidelines for peaking, or where do you see your research going in that area?
So it's an interesting one. I was thinking about this earlier on when I did it, because the paper we wrote on it, whereby we looked at what people are doing in terms of competitive peaking, it was really comprehensive. And I think we sort of proposed a framework on how people could potentially go and do it. And then when is it? About 4 years later, Escalante and Barkrat and Alan Aragon and
Mm.
Schoenfield came out and just wrote a paper on like how you could do it based around what we were saying. We found people doing in there with a little bit more evidence. So I think they've actually already written that paper, and so that's available, and it's really comprehensive. I mean, when I started first working out, this occurred to me. The contrast between the information which is available for people now compared to like
Mm.
2004, 2006, compared to when I started doing this, there's so much more evidence on this. There's so many people doing this better now, much more professionally and everything like that. That you're all so fortunate that we've done the work, and that there's people which are much more professional with this now. So I think the guideline paper is there. If I was to follow this stuff up here, I think what I'd probably do is I'd be more keen on maybe looking at what the guys do in the untested side of the sport, trying to see if I could access them. But I think we kind of know a little bit about that. And to answer your cramping question, I think some of that comes from diuretics. But just maybe doing some sort of follow-up stuff to see, well, okay, if we deplete people's muscle glycogen, how much of an increase in, say, bicep size can you get in terms of carbohydrate loading? Because I think the mistake a lot of guys make is they just don't load enough on carbohydrate. They say, right, okay, regular diet, we're having 300 grams a day, and then we're going to do our deplete and take ourselves down to 50 grams, and now we're going to do a couple of high days at 400 or 500 grams. And I'm like, guys, 400 or 500 grams, this is barely anything. When you consider what you've got to have in terms of just maintaining your body for a day for its overall calorie load, an extra, 200, 300 calories on top? I mean, really, we should be looking at carbohydrate loading strategies in the region of 700 to 1,200. That's a load. That's going to make probably a difference there. So that's where I'd maybe take it. I'd go and have a look and see, okay, well, how much can we put in people? Or maybe the follow-up work is to just go and do another survey and see what people are doing now, if things have changed. My suspicion is that things haven't changed that much. I think they're maybe just drinking a little bit more fluid on the day, and they're maybe doing a little bit more with sodium. That's what I think.
There's probably some other unconventional, strategies that I've seen recently. Something like fat loading. I know they touched on that in the Escalante paper. Could you discuss that a little bit, and like, have you found that has worked for your athletes? Because I know like there's some people who are all for it and some people who just don't really see the kind of rationale in it. So,
well, when we surveyed people doing it, very few people are doing it. So that's the first thing in there. So if I was to pull up the paper, I could tell you exactly the numbers. But I suspect that there's probably less than 10% of bodybuilders are doing fat loading type strategies. And if you're going to fat load, that means you've got to manipulate your carbohydrate loading as well at the same time, yeah? So you've got to consider that as a potential aspect on there. Fat in itself is hydrophobic, so it pushes away fluid. So if you're going to do a whole bunch of fat loading and put the fats into the muscle, then you maybe don't get the same volumizing effect if you're a little bit flat, if you see what I mean. You maybe can't get the same size, but maybe you have to do the fat loading in combination with the carbohydrate loading. But then it becomes a spinning plate scenario, okay? You've got another variable that you've got to try and manage at the same time. I don't know what the capacity would be for you in terms of how much extra triglycerides you could put in. I'm sure you guys have seen the stuff on metabolic flexibility. Interesting stuff. That ability to utilize a little bit more fat, a little bit more carbohydrate. Maybe what you can do, and I was thinking about this, is get people particularly metabolically flexible so that they can then, if they can rely a little bit more on their intramuscular triglyceride stores, when they're on stage, that might mean that they don't go as flat because they're utilizing more of these their fats rather than the glycogen itself. But I suspect the bodybuilders are actually all right with their flexibility because they do a lot of cardio, yeah? And they do it at varying intensities and so on from there. But fat loading, no, I probably just don't think you can get the same level of fullness. What foods would you choose? I imagine they'd be very acidic because that's what fats are. They're lipids. Yeah. So if you've ever done anything whereby you've had a whole load of fats, you do get a burn in your throat from there. But then 10% of people are doing it. So maybe there's something to it. So I would write it off. A few years ago, I was a bit more skeptic of it, but I don't know. What do you think?
I was just going to say, I know pretty popular method used by like Joe Jeffrey. I know he does coach a lot of like enhanced athletes. Like maybe there is some type of difference there that I am unaware of. Utilizing like the right kind of fats is going to be more like saturated fats are probably not going to be the best way to go about it if you are doing a load, because they can reduce insulin sensitivity, whereas like picking more kind of polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats, they could potentially increase the insulin sensitivity to uptaking carbohydrates then maybe in the kind of following days when you are doing a carbohydrate load. But again, now that I've gone through my first prep, I would be more open to trying different peaking strategies and different peaking protocols. Definitely for my first prep, I was happy that like my peaking processes were pretty standard and like there wasn't too many variables thrown in there, because it did kind of give me like peace of mind. But definitely for like an advanced competitor who wants to kind of experiment with these things, I mean, no harm if you don't have a huge amount of weight placed on the show.
There is actually an interesting phenomena within endurance athletes. I don't know if you've came across this before, Andy, where if you look at heavily entrained endurance athletes and athletes and I suppose older adults as well, is that they actually have an adaptation that causes a high amount of intramuscular adipose tissue.
Yep.
So I don't know, is it maybe seen or has it been observed within bodybuilders of a certain training age, or maybe if they've adapted to a certain training style where there could be obviously still a need for glycogen within the muscle, but is there the potential that there could be some adaptation where they have maybe some fat adaptive muscle qualities? I don't know. Is that maybe anecdotally that in some athletes they could in some way because of their training style or otherwise? And obviously, like you said, where they're doing lots of cardio, if they've done that for enough years, is there the potential for that to have occurred in bodybuilders, or at least more seasoned bodybuilders? I'm
I,
just
I
talking out loud. I'm just talking out loud here. I don't know.
I agree. I think there probably is. I think there probably is because you got to sort of think about, I mean, the way in which you get fitter in terms of your ability to increase your intramuscular fatty acid stores is just working at higher exercise and intensities. Yeah, typically aerobically is what does that. And but one of the main reasons that you get that adaptation taking place is it's very often is a muscle glycogen preserving strategy that
Yeah,
your body utilizes. So you can work at a higher intensity. And a lot of people don't appreciate this, that as you get fitter, your fat burning zone moves up. So whereas your fat burning zone might have been 60 to 70%, that's what you always see on that on the exercise bike or on the treadmill, don't you? But as you get fitter, you can then start utilizing the fat at a higher exercise intensity and the intramuscular stores go up. So you've got to work at a higher intensity, start burning through the carbohydrates and start working anaerobically. But no, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be
yeah.
surprised if that was one of the intensities. Sorry, one of the adaptations that take place. And do you know what? I'm maybe going to look at that. I'm sure. I'm sure there'll be some papers on that people have looked at that for sure. Definitely.
Yeah, I suppose it was just when Shane was talking about the potential for fat loading. I suppose it was just
Mhm.
kind of and we don't think of bodybuilding as an endurance sport, but I suppose inadvertently, depending on the training style and the
Yeah.
amount of aerobic training that the
Mhm.
athlete is doing, I suppose you could get some adaptations that you not might necessarily not be chasing or you mightn't be looking for, because I suppose it's particularly in natural bodybuilding.
Mhm.
We were talking to Alberto Nunes there recently. Like Alberto's 40 and he's been bodybuilding for well over 20 years. And if we look
Mhm.
at the highest levels in natural bodybuilding, guys that are late 30s, 40s, even
Yeah.
50s. And I suppose if we've been training for long enough, we, like you said, there probably are papers out there. You could have some other adaptations happening internally within the muscle that someone mightn't necessarily be aware of. And those strategies like fat loading could become maybe part of someone's peak, and it might kind of be outside of the realm of what's um, done commonly. But it could be, it
No,
just goes back to that thing of like n equals one for any of these kinds of things, that the need for individualization probably outweighs the needs of the masses.
yeah, well, it's a good point. And I actually, before I came on, I was thinking about this as well because the peaking strategy that you utilize, it's all about looking your best. Yeah. And we talked about being flat and we talked about being full and so on in that carbohydrate depleting phase. What that carbohydrate depleting phase does very often is it gives you a really dry look. So you try and get really dry. And then what you do is you load up on the carbohydrates to try and then maintain that dry look, but now with full muscles. But some people actually, they like that dry look because they look absolutely diced when they typically do it. So if it's a look that you're trying to aim for, and this is all about trying to play your own aces to look your best. Maybe fullness is your thing, maybe shape's your thing, maybe being diced is your thing. Then doing the fat loading strategy could be the way that you approach this along with the dryness at the same time, that gives you the energy to have your best look on stage. So yeah, you could totally do it. Totally.
Yeah, and I think for bodybuilding as well, where you try and play to your strengths, like if you're someone, if you know you're coming in and you're maybe not as lean as your competitors, but you're carrying a lot of size, like you said, you'll try and emphasize that. Maybe if you're not as big, but you are balls shredded, you probably will maybe try to play to your strengths a little bit more. I think it's quite different to powerlifting in the sense that
Yeah.
the objectivity that for a lot of people that maybe exist in the numbers game are involved in different sports. It's quite abstract when you are watching a bodybuilding show for the first time that you're kind of going, well, they all look brilliant by normal standards. But I suppose when you take the judging criteria into account, and maybe even depending on the federation, they might have slightly different criteria that they're looking for. So even depending on where you're competing or the judges, that are there on the day, that could influence your decision making.
I think one of the things that people struggle with the most with it is the consistency in terms of the quality of competitor from year to year. So you can see like really strong lineups some year where the guy that finishes fifth looks amazing, but he doesn't make that top three. But if he'd competed the year before, or if he competes the next year, that guy that's fifth, maybe he can win. So that, and you can tell, I was like, man, you look amazing. You look great. It's just a tough lineup. But because you've not got, it's subjective, that you get that. And people kind of struggle with that as well. It just depends who's there on the day and all that sort of stuff, as you allude to.
Yeah, I think it's subjective, but it's also objective in a sense because when you have people standing
Yeah.
on a lineup, you can see people who are like they are shredded, but you could just see one guy standing beside them who just looks completely different to everybody else, and
Yeah.
like that's not like that's not subjective at that point. That's like that person is objectively bigger, leaner, and they look more aesthetic. They've got like more of an X taper or more of an X frame, for example.
Yeah.
And I think you only really kind of notice that when you, I suppose the difference is probably bigger at like amateur shows. But then, for example, like going to the likes of like Worlds, like looking at like the likes of like your class and like the lightweights, the heavies at WNBF Worlds last year, and like you can see there at that point, like everybody is kind of cut from the same cloth. Like everybody has that like really nice X frame, everybody's symmetrical, everybody's shredded, and then at that point, then that's when it becomes like about these kind of very kind of small kind of differences between competitor to competitor. So I think for the kind of normal person going to a show, seeing an amateur show kind of first of all, and then seeing what the pros are like that, because yeah, again, as you said there, like everybody can look amazing, and to the average person they can look amazing, but when you're looking at it as a sport, there's got to be very clear, very very small margins between like a professional to professional versus amateur to amateur.
Yeah, no. And novice is always the most challenging class because you just never know what you're going to get.
Obviously, you're a practitioner as well as like you're a coach, you're an athlete, and you're a researcher. So you have a lot of experience with kind of doing peaks between yourself as well as with your clients and seeing what happens in like the kind of bodybuilding population. So one question that's a pretty big one is like, what are the most common mistakes that people make when they are going through the peaking process, and how can people essentially avoid making those mistakes?
Okay. I recall I sent you an article on this, and I hope that people maybe go and read it. And it's an article that says how to peak right, and it talks about a whole load of the common mistakes that people make when they do these things. Okay, so common ones. I think not practicing a peak. If you can practice a peak, that makes a big difference, particularly if you're doing a complicated one. Because just because you can do bodybuilding and you can do like your diet regularly doesn't mean that you've got great nutritional skills. Because to be able to do like a complicated peaking plan whereby you've got to deplete on certain days, then load on certain days, and change your food types and cook up lots of different batches of food and change your cardio regime and stuff like that, some people just get overloaded by that completely. So the first time that they've gone to do it, the week before their contest or whatever, is not the time to do that. Yeah, if you can practice that 4 weeks before, then that's gold, because then you can iron out all the kinks, yeah, that happen, and people just get flustered all the time, yeah, when they do these things. They're like, oh, should I have this food or that food, or can I have salt on this, or am I allowed to have coffee or juice or pop? So they ask all these sort of questions that you might think that will seem obvious to you at the time, but obviously they're experiencing it for the first time. So I think being organized and practicing, you should absolutely practice your peaks. Irritable bowel syndrome is a common issue amongst bodybuilders getting ready for competitions. Yeah, some of it is just the restriction of the food choices. So your average bodybuilder has between around about 13, 14 different food items that they'll consume. By the time they get down to the last little bit, they're down to about 9. Yeah, so they've restricted a lot of stuff, and I could probably name them all off the top of my head. But if you're only eating, I don't know, rice, sweet potato, and oats as your main carbohydrate stores, and then all of a sudden you introduce like bananas and other fruit like grapes, and I don't know, you put in sweet potatoes even though you don't normally have them, or you decide to start eating cream of rice or something like that. Sometimes you've got no idea how your body's going to react, and you could get some real irritable bowel issues off the back of that, which could just ruin you in terms of your peak and totally throw you off in terms of the look that you have, but also psychologically. So you can work that stuff out in advance of the competition by doing the practice as well, and you can reflect on it as well. So having a proper reflective process, you as a coach, you could develop a questionnaire for this, like how did you feel it went? Did you notice any side effects? Is there anything you would change? Were you happy with the food choices? What day do you think you looked your best? Having a proper reflection, because it could just easily be a simple case of, oh, we'll change that food item for that food item. Or maybe there's foods that you're having as part of your peak which are just a pain in the arse to prep. And maybe you've got to prep and you've got to go somewhere, yeah? So you've got to travel a lot of time with these peak things. And maybe the foods that you're going to have when you're traveling are not practical, yeah? So again, having the practice on this, you can work out what's viable and not and what's not viable. So that's the major one. Probably not practicing, getting stressed out associated with it. Not having any salt at all. That's a mistake that I think people make. So when you're trying to carbohydrate load, what you've got to realize is, as part of the digestion and the absorption process, carbohydrates are absorbed via something called the sodium and glucose transporter within your small intestine. Yeah, so some of it goes through your GLUT transporters, but some of it actually goes through these pathways as well. So if you don't have any sodium and you're just trying to eat a whole of carbohydrate, then you can't get it all absorbed into your muscle and into your body as effectively as you would like. So just not practicing. That's a common one. Winging it. That's one. Yeah, just absolutely winging it. So I've been sent plans before by coaches, and it's just like, eat. This is how many carbohydrates, proteins, and fats you need to eat. I'm like, well, can I eat whatever I want? And some people probably just would. Yeah. And people can make atrocious food choices if you give them enough rope, right? So making sure that you're eating sensible things, not trying out to eat cream cakes and Subway sandwiches and pizzas and things like that the nights before shows. Okay, it worked, but you don't know how much of a difference it made in terms of the carbohydrate content, the protein content, the sodium content, the fat content. I'd much rather know what you're eating down to a T, because then we can manipulate it. Because how big's a pizza? Is it this big? Is it this big? I mean, I don't know. And who says it's going to work for you every single time? So those, I think, are some common ones. I've probably forgotten a whole bunch of common mistakes, but if we go and check out that article, you can see some of my recommendations. From a coaching perspective, communication is key. You have to be an effective communicator. That's it. You have to be able to get your ideas down on paper or across in a video or everything like that, so that your athlete knows every single thing that they've got to do. No stone is left unturned so that they can just focus on the job of competing. Because if they know they've got to do this under this condition, this under this condition, this under this condition, then you go, right, I do that, 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 yeah? And then you can just focus on that job. So if you can take care of all that stuff by being an effective communicator. And then I suppose a final one that just occurs to me. The show day process. I think some competitors expect that to be perfect. Yeah? They expect that they've got a program list. They know when their class is on. So because they know when their class is on, they've got all their meals planned out, and they're going to eat this at this time, and this at this time, this at this time, and this at this time. Yeah, from there. And it's probably exactly the same with powerlifting, yeah? And I've done strongman myself, so that's my point of strength reference. But these things rarely go to the schedule that they're saying they're going to go to, and people just lose their mind to get stressed out. So being able to sort of accept that they've got to take some degree of autonomy, that things might not go exactly to a schedule, and that they have to sort of take a little bit of responsibility in terms of adjusting things themselves. I think that's another one. Does that cover the sort of things that you were expecting, or have I missed anything out that you were thinking off the top of your head?
I think there'd be sooner no mass on Sunday than there'd be a bodybuilding show running on time.
That Irish show that we went to that you were competing at, dude, it started late because the guy that was doing the sound and music was at mass.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
That's so
really
Irish.
surprised. And just to maybe bring it back, I suppose, in another direction. You mentioned you were doing research on cordyceps, and I think that's really
Sure.
interesting. For anyone that kind of doesn't know, cordyceps have been around, I suppose, as a ergogenic aid in some capacity for quite a while. They would have been maybe quite used in I suppose they might have popped their head up first in maybe the Soviet era in
Yep.
endurance sports.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm a little bit shaky in kind of the mechanistic work there for how it's theorized to help aerobic athletes and endurance athletes, but kind of more recently it's kind of been seen to have some nootropic kind of effects as well, I think.
Yep.
So could you maybe talk a little bit through because I even just for me, I'm interested in that, and a little bit through kind of why we might use it and what kind of the uses of its efficacy, or a little bit on the efficacy of its use.
Okay, right. So this is a lesson here for any of the sport and exercise science students or students that are out there. When you don't know the answer to the question, you just say you don't know, because full disclosure, I just think this is a really interesting idea. And I'm really keen to have a look at it on here, because I think the research out there on psychedelics and their use in people who are suffering from PTSD and
Mm,
depression is interesting, and that how those particular drugs work is that they force the brain to start going down different neurological pathways and to start going down new schema. Yeah, rather than the regular old pathways and highways that your brain goes down. And if you brain image people, that's kind of what they do. And people combine this with therapy. And I think that stuff's really, really cool. And in recent
mm,
years, I say in recent years, but we've all watched and listened to Joe Rogan down the years and heard him talk about his lion mane supplement and stuff like that. And I'm just keen to know, right, does this stuff actually work? Does it actually work? Yeah. Because I suppose that the effect, and you mentioned nootropic, we're just talking about something that influences the nervous system. I don't know what pathway it would go down or which part of the brain it's going to start to initiate with. I believe that the prefrontal cortex is our higher decision making thing. So maybe it does something in there. Now, I don't have access to an MRI scanner. I just don't. But what I can do is I can do very simple tests with people whereby I give them like just an arithmetic task or something, exercise them on a bike to exhaustion, and then see how well they can do a task or react on here and test, okay, let's see what different dosages are going on here. So I'm interested from that perspective. If I go and have an investigation and I have a look and see, well, there's nothing really in here, despite what the Soviets and stuff like that have done, then we'll cut it there. But I'm just kind of curious. I just want to know. because I've seen it being used and people have said, it's like, oh, Andy, can I use this supplement and so on? I'm like, well, if you can afford
Don't
it,
know.
the rest of the diet,
Yeah.
everything's it's not banned, then you're sure give it a bash. What's the other one? Ashwagandha. I mean, people are really keen on this.
Yeah.
I don't think there's really, again, a great deal of research to kind of support it. Most of the people that are suggesting we use it are Americans, and the bar for what is acceptable or gets a health claim in the States compared to what's allowed a health claim in Europe is completely different. So maybe that's what's going on there. So the answer to your question is I don't know, but it seems interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the FDA approval on something is 9 times out of 10 it's probably going to be sauce or completely just sugar pills in a veggie
Yeah.
cap or
I
yeah.
think it's two
Uh,
papers. I have two papers showing a positive effect, despite 10 over here could show nothing. And in
yeah,
Europe, if you get for the EFSA, you probably know about 70 papers
yeah,
to be able to get the same sort of thing. So it's
yeah, like fairly well researched supplements that probably don't get a look in and I suppose I'm not talking necessarily about bodybuilding, but maybe bicarbonate of soda for endurance athletes,
yeah, I've
beta
used that.
vulgar, yeah, and like beta beetroot, beta vulgaris, any of these kinds of
Yeah,
things like that are even there's a body of evidence saying there's probably some effect, but even then, still, like you very rarely see an influencer or someone maybe on going on the Joe Rogan podcast pushing either of those. I do think an awful lot of it maybe does go back to having the secret sauce, having the answer, saying this is the key, this is the missing link, and obviously owning shares in the company that's selling the thing is
yeah.
probably a
I love
prob-
and I love Andrew Huberman, but they're like, try
oh
this.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah,
come on, guys, you're selling it. Come on.
yeah.
I wrote an article on my website, Pro Prep Coaching. If you go on there, you'll see I wrote one on ecosterone and testosterone, and I think it's titled like most supplements are garbage. I think I was feeling particularly annoyed that day when I wrote that one.
Yeah, I think the Turkesterone one is funny. If like a lot, if what's your man's name on YouTube? Is it Derek More Plates More Dates?
Yeah,
And he's kind of a big proponent, I think, of Turkesterone, but subsequently also sells it. So like, I mean, even you don't have to be too much of a critical thinker to kind of wonder is uh is this guy in some way biased and giving that information to me? What other kind of supplements, Andrew, do you see people using, and you're like, ooh, maybe not?
in terms of, do I think they're high risk or
Um,
NF?
I suppose maybe we could go into the ones that are high risk. I suppose obviously in if you're a tested athlete, maybe something to that you could maybe attest to as regards kind of maybe choosing supplement brands. But I think I was asking the question maybe are there supplements you hear people taking and you're kind of going, oh, no real point in taking that or no real use in wasting your money there.
Uh, Probiotics, definitely. I've my PhD was in the gut microbiota, and most of the positive effects we see in the gut microbiota occur in the lower bowel. Yeah, so in the colon. Yeah, most probiotics you buy, nearly all of them are lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, and they make up a very, we're talking less than 1% in a lot of cases, small percentage of microbes that exist in the lower bowel where you really are likely to see the effects. And the reason that we market these ones and we use them a lot is because they're viable under aerobic conditions, so they're still alive. Whereas the microbes I think which are probably likely to have the most positive effects, things like Ruminococcus bromii or fecal bacteria prosnitzi, etc., are anaerobic in nature, so they wouldn't be viable in a little pot that you can sell from there, and they're probably also much more expensive. So I think a lot of that stuff as well probably doesn't really do a great deal. There's some conditions in which they do. So traveler's diarrhea is definitely one of them. Maybe if someone's took a hold of antibiotics maybe under those scenarios, that works. But I think once we eventually get around to the next generation of probiotics being developed, which will come after we've managed to really work out what the key populations, species, etc., are from fecal microbial transplants, and we can put them into a pill, I think those ones, bifidobacteria and lactobacilli, will just become redundant. That's my thinking on that one, because I just don't think they do all that much. And if you look at the position stances that people like the IOC and the GISSN have put out on this stuff, I just think, like, how many microbiologists that work in this area did you have write those stances? Probably no one. So yeah, I think them. Other ones, ashwagandha, never seen. I'm not convinced by that one. And then there's a whole load. Like, people come to me with lots of stuff. They're like, can I take this? Can I take that? The cordyceps, I don't know if these things work. No idea. No idea. The ones that probably do work. Oh, go on, Shane.
I was going to say, I actually have a few bags of those. I went to a Ben Prokowski seminar, and he had, like, kind of free goodie bags, and like there's just like loads of like performance mushrooms. I haven't taken any of them. Mike is gonna go. Like, again, I'm very much like a skeptic when it does come to anything like that, right? Because, like, I don't know, where you can't see that there's any kind of real evidence to support like mechanism of like action. It's like, is it worth the money? Probably not.
Yeah. Exactly. In terms of the ones that do, I mean, you mentioned a few interesting ones already, Lawrence. I think the other ones which are obvious that you take, caffeine, we talked about that. The creatine, I mean, it's been researched to death. Electrolytes definitely help you with your hydration. Sports gels, you can take these things if you're doing endurance sport or sports strengths. You can take these things as well. Bicarbonates probably does something. I've used it myself and noticed an effect. Beta-alanine's an interesting one. You talked about the nitrates. And here, I think you mentioned another one which I forget, but sounded viable. Cherry active stuff as well. Some of the sleep stuff, I mean, I don't know where melatonin actually falls. If it's drop, depending on the country, or if it's supplement. I suppose in the States you've got no problem getting that from there. And I think that's the majority of the ones that probably do something. The rest is, I mean, how much of a difference? Does it have any difference? I don't know. Don't know. Probably better off spending the money on better quality food.
That could be the title of the podcast, I think.
Yeah. Protein powders are convenient supplements as well, but you could get the protein from your diet. But definitely convenient. Useful.
And something I kind of wanted to touch on, which as well was maybe because I suppose you're obviously competing for bodybuilding as well, but I think a lot of the people that listen probably be competing in tested sport in some capacity or another. So what kinds of things would you recommend people look out for when choosing supplements?
Okay.
Avoid, obviously, pissing hot.
I like that expression. I've never heard that before. So the USDA, I'm pretty sure they still have this on their website, but I think it's 411. It's called high risk supplements. They've got a big list of all the high risk supplements you want to avoid from the brands that you want to avoid as well. They've mentioned them. Like I said, I don't know if that's still there, but there's some obvious ones. So pre-workouts, right? These things are high risk. You don't want to take them on the day of your event because unless it's got an Informed Sport logo on it, which means that it's been batch tested for not being contaminated, then you maybe stand to have to fail a test. So I just wouldn't take the chance, particularly ones from companies which sound a bit dodgy, like, I don't know, Chaos Labs or Skull Labs or Warfare Labs or something like this. And like one of the athletes at the WNBF the other year there failed a test for taking a pre-workout. Yeah, took a pre-workout, and she said, I asked her, like, okay, what did you take? She said, I took this. Went and looked it up. I was like, right, okay, that looks dodgy because it's got one of these stupid sounding names because you want to sound hardcore. Looked at ingredients, right, nothing looks bad there. Did another search, found another version. I was like, right, that's the ingredient there. And our coach just told her to take it. So,
Oh,
so that's a naive coach, and it's the coach that's caused her to fail because the coach should know better than that. But the conversation about athletes working with coaches that aren't natural is another conversation in itself, and I think it's a big one. But certainly, pre-workout supplements, you got to watch for this stuff. Fat burners, yeah, there's a whole host of different fat burners you can take, little tablets which will promise to burn you extra fat, which will include ingredients that you get from caffeine, or sorry, from coffee or green tea and things like that. Different plant polyphenols which purportedly will do stuff. Main ingredient often in them is caffeine. Some things there's ephedrine in them and other things as well. But these can be high risk as well. Again, particularly if you're looking at companies which have got this sort of dodgy sounding names on them as well at the same time. So yeah, I would avoid them. Testosterone boosters. So there's a whole host of these things. So we mentioned some testosterone and stuff like that as well. But masquerading amongst the testosterone boosters are the ones which have got just contamination or which are trying to pretend to be testosterone boosters or just outright steroids. So stuff like pro hormones. Those are high risk as well. So that's your sort of main ones that you want to probably go, right, okay, probably going to stay away from it, from those alongside the ones which have got the dodgy sounding names from the manufacturers. And then you would not believe the amount of times I've been in like a posing studio helping someone out. And I've got to say, I mean, I don't know what your demographic is here, but it's usually women whereby their coaches said, "Oh, just take these tablets or whatever," or they've said they've just come up to me and said it's clenbuterol banned. That's
oh,
not a thing.
Jesus Christ.
Like, and I mean, it's sad. I mean, you're talking like probably happens 3 or 4 times a year. Like,
Yeah,
Jen,
I think yeah,
it,
I think it's probably is an issue where, like you said, if if there's the if someone does find themselves in a position where they have a coach that'll maybe
yeah,
appeal to authority and kind of say, look, just trust me, bro.
yeah,
And then you do end up in these cases where like athletes will inadvertently take a PED or at least something banned,
yeah.
and then find themselves in a situation where they have to just, I don't know, pull out of the competition or otherwise. Um, so I don't know. It's not a. I suppose it does kind of come down to the athlete then knowing that if you are competing in drug tested sports, that you kind of do have to have a personal awareness there as to what you're taking in, and there is such a large element of personal responsibility there. For example,
Yeah.
like if you're in field sports, drug tested bodybuilding, powerlifting, whatever it is, that you have to be aware of what you're taking in. Like even like I have a bunch of the teenager, like I coach a rate of teenage powerlifters, and these are the little gremlins that you're afraid of that are going to go into a supplement shop, see
Yeah.
a clearance tub of pre-workout for €10 or something, and go, ah,
Yeah.
yeah, that'll do me now. And
Yeah.
then you're looking at them whip out this tub. Where did you get this from? And I do think it's that kind of, I suppose when you talked about personalities there earlier, it's that kind of like agreeable, open kind of person that'll
Yeah.
maybe be susceptible to that kind of peer pressure, or maybe the pressure from the coach, the overbearing coach that'll say, here, go on, lob 120 micrograms of clenbuterol into you there and see you in 4 weeks.
Mhm. Yeah. No, 100%. I totally agree. I mean, if you look at like what UCAD's policy on this, the UK anti-doping, it's all around education. That's where it
Yeah,
all comes from. It's just education, 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 and not just around what's banned, what's not banned, but around health. And then this notion of fair sport. So the big campaign just now is 100% me. So getting them to sort of think that it's their efforts which are producing the positive side, the positive result in the field, and that are competing against other people that are competing on a level playing field. So trying to instill values in them is a big part of that as well. And I think that's the only way you can sort of combat some of that stuff. But that's a whole other podcast, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I think you touched on that really, really well, though. I think even given um the places where people can look those up, I think is really, really helpful. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to go through there, Shane? I think we've covered everything really, really well, Andy. That kind of ended up being a lot more kind of a research-driven podcast, which I really, really liked. So thanks for that.
The only thing,
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Oh,
the
go on,
only
Shane,
thing,
sorry.
the only thing I wanted to ask Andy is when is your debut in the platform?
Oh, yeah, so I've been training for this, haven't I? I've seen you've been liking my little videos. I think I'm going to do one of these. They call them meets. They're not competitions, are they? It's a meet. Get this right.
Competition's okay. Yeah.
Competition's okay. I think I'm going to have to do one in December. From there, my shoulder's a little bit sore, my knee's a bit sore. I mean, I'm old. I think I'll try and do one in December. If I can do a squat of like 220 to 230, I'd probably take that. If I can pull 240 to 260, I'd take that. And then if I can do a 150 plus bench, I think that'd be all right. That would be acceptable for an old guy.
That's very, very, very acceptable. Yeah. For first competition, anyway. What you need to do now, Andy, is get it right into the 105s, into maybe the 120 pluses, and see where those numbers can take you, I think.
I'm 87, I think, just now, so I'm never eating up to get up to 100 again. Like, I was 100 during lockdown. My friends were bullying me, or like, you're 99 and a half, just keep going. I was like, oh my God, I'm so heavy. It's not good. No, I'm staying at 90.
Yeah, no, we'll keep an eye out. Yeah, and we might try and get you over here to do an abs pro competition then eventually when you get that 500 dots.
You actually have you're getting some help from Robert Masson, is that right?
Oh, do you know Rob? All right, it's a
Yeah.
small
Oh,
world.
yeah.
He's
He's a lovely guy. Yeah. Oh, right. Yes, fab. Yeah. So yeah, he's given me a few pointers. I've got up quite high in terms of the squat and the deadlift in terms of the numbers. And he was like, Andy, you need to come and see me. I'm going to help you do this better because you're lifting like a bodybuilder still. So he's given me some
Yeah.
pointers behind all three lifts. And I'm like, I've had to take the lifts back down again, but I'm like, actually, I'm doing them better now. So yeah, hopefully I can keep going. But I'm my own worst enemy. I just like pounding myself into the ground.
Yeah.
Like, should I take
Yeah,
a deload? Nah, I'll just keep lifting heavy. This is why my
Yeah.
shoulders sore, my knees sore. So if I don't get crocked, I think December.
Yeah, I think that's trying to have the difference between like training like a bodybuilder and training like a powerlifter. That's like when I was coming out of prep, that's like the one thing that I had to like change when I started training for strength again, because I was so used to like pretty much like rinsing myself every training session. And then when you do that for
Yeah.
strength, if you do that in your first squat session of the week, you're gonna be fucked for your next one. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's trying to develop that skill.
It's because I'm
Anyway.
an idiot, though. That's the main reason. Because I just like lifting heavy weights.
Yeah, if you just
Okay.
scratch a little bit under the surface, I think there's a need in most people, to be honest with you. You just kind of want to go in and borderline cause self-harm and then come out of it and go, oh yeah, no, that was really beneficial.
Yeah. Honest with myself.
Yeah. I hate myself.
No.
All right.
Andy, thanks so much.
Okay.
That was brilliant. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. Much appreciated. And please do go check out the WMBF UK. Yeah, we're on the Instagram. You can find our website as well, wmbfuk.com, and we run competitions every single year as well. So I've been investing in that for a long time now. And yeah, and if you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram, fueled by Scott's Oats.
Unbelievable. Yeah, thank you very much for coming on, Andy. It was a pleasure, and we'll probably have you on again at some point. And yeah, if you did enjoy the podcast at home, make sure to leave us a rating and review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Share it on your Instagram story, and give Andy a follow. And if you are interested in doing bodybuilding preps or posing coaching, get on to him. He's the man. All right, that's it. and we will see you in the next one.